There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them. Well, hello everybody, Dave Coplin here, back at you with another live stream, dialing into the future of work. It's Wednesday, can you believe it? And I don't even know what week we're on. It's week 17 actually, funnily enough, so I do know what week we're on. I thought what would be good this week, we're going to change the format slightly. I think let's just get straight into the conversation. We're going to hear from our sponsors, a little bit of advertising halfway through the show, like all good podcasts do. But really, I wanted to get stuck into a conversation about the hype of AI. We've been living through some interesting times, and this week the news has been full of the problems with algorithms. And my heart goes out to any student out there, whether you're an A-level student and you're figuring out what to do, or you're a GCSE student and you've got that fun, I guess, to come tomorrow. The whole issue has been brought to us about we've been built up the hype about algorithms. They're going to do amazing things. They're going to take all of our jobs. They're going to change the way that we live. They're going to solve things like cancer. All of these amazing. They're going to take over the world. Have you seen the movies? It's on the TV. I saw it. It's true. Really? Is that what they're capable of doing? And I think if we're going to get all of the goodness that technology has to offer, we need to start to get underneath some of these challenges, underneath some of these over-promises and under-deliveries, and figure out, is this a technology that just isn't ready for prime time? Or is this a technology that's being misused? Or do we just not know what it is yet, or how we can use it going forward? So I thought, wouldn't it be brilliant if on this show we could have a conversation with someone who's been thinking about these things for a long time? And guess what? That person is Dr. Felix Hovsepian. How are you doing, Felix? Great to have you with us.
Thanks, I'm doing fine. Good to be on the show, Dave.
Oh, you say that now, Felix. Give it about 20 minutes and you'll be thinking, oh, well, why did I do that? Anyway, we'll see what we can do. So I thought a really good place for us to start, Felix, would be just the fiasco that we've had with the whole approach to trying to, grade individuals on the basis of an exam they didn't take. But apparently it's the algorithm's fault. The algorithm got it wrong. What's your perspective on that?
I think that's a good scapegoat in my mind, because the algorithm didn't write itself. Someone created the algorithm. And in fact, it was a committee of people that looked at all the data, looked at the various factors that they believed should play into the estimates that were sent by the teachers. And based on that, they created a model, and then they implemented it, and lo and behold, we have the results and the outcome that we saw. Humans were involved in a large extent in that process. It wasn't just a mathematical formula.
So that's interesting. So humans were involved in the creation of it, and yet it's humans that we look to for the solution. So let's scrap the algorithm and let's go and ask the human teachers what they think. So surely those two things should have been the same thing, right?
In theory, yes. And I think that they tried to remove the bias of the teachers from various schools, unfortunately using things like postcodes. And it just didn't pan out the way that they had envisaged.
I think it shows.
And I think that.
Go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it shows the complexity of data, doesn't it? And that's the thing that frustrates me about, when we talk about artificial intelligence and algorithms in the context of AI, we're talking about things that spot patterns in data. But when we say spot patterns, they're spotting patterns that they've been told to spot. Or been rewarded to spot. So we can, if we ask them to spot the wrong things, then they'll give us the wrong answer. Now, I mean, I guess the challenge we have with the example I've opened with is it's not really AI at this point, is it? It's just a series of logic statements that led to the conclusions that were created.
Well, there are documents available, proper official documents that are. I believe more than 300 pages of the decisions that were made. And I did not see anything in the documents that led me to believe this had anything to do with AI. This was just regular application of statistics and decisions made by a committee that was assigned the task. And I have to admit, my heart goes out to all of the students that were caught in this.
Yeah, no, totally.
Um,
So
and
let's.
I would have been in tears, I have to admit, because I was one of those people that did really well in exams, but not leading up to it.
Right. No, totally, totally. So let's flip the example and let's go to some other things that we could talk about that sort of give us a similar thing. There's a lovely presentation given by a gentleman called Geoff Hinton, who some of you will know is one of the godfathers of AI. And he was presenting to a medical audience, in fact, an audience of radiologists, and basically telling them that why have you chosen your career? It's a dead-end career, what you're doing. We don't need more radiologists because we've got AI. So actually, go and do something else because we've got that covered. Is that a good thing? Is he right to say things like that? Are we going to lose industries like that?
I hope not. And historically, I have also built X-ray systems and had a look at what artificial intelligence had to offer. I believe that we should be thinking of AI at this stage as an augmenting technology. The machines that are doing radiology and taking the images and helping us to see some of the patterns we could not see as human beings with the equipment we have today. So these machines are actually helping radiologists deliver a better diagnosis of the individual patients. If we look at it that way, I think AI is providing a phenomenal leap forward. If we look at it in terms of replacing the radiologist, I think that's not so good, because I don't believe that radiologists simply do what the machine learning algorithms are doing. And that's the problem. Humans are very complex.
That's one of my favourite case studies. Actually, was from Adam Brooks Hospital, and it was a radiologist, or it was sorry, it was in oncology, but it was based on using machine learning to identify brain tumours in scans. And the genius was actually what the humans did with the result, because even though the machine learning was more accurate than the human and could process more patients than the human, so it would take the average good a radiologist about 5 hours to look at the scans of a single patient to spot whether they'd got a tumor or not. The software could do it in 30 minutes. But what I loved about the story has got nothing to do with the fact that the technology is better than the human. It was, in fact, that this particular sort of radiologist had said, well, hang on a minute. If I think about where I add most value in the process, this is the point at which I'm about to tell another human being that they have or haven't got brain cancer. So actually, I'm going to take the 4.5 hours that's been saved, and rather than process another 9 patients, I'm going to use that time to have a greater impact and greater outcome with the patient and spend more time with them. And that, to me, is the whole sort of point of this. Is yes, the algorithms can do some of the number crunching, some of the heavy cognitive lifting that we humans could do, but that doesn't mean that we're out the door or we sit on our fat backsides and do nothing. It means that we're now freed up to do things that are innately human, things that the algorithms are yet to be able to do successfully. So I think
And also for them to be able to, not just help other patients, but also do some research of their own.
Totally.
So it's really freeing up the humans to do what they're really good at, which is creativity. But in terms of the radiology, I mean, they are able to see thousands of grayscales, and a human being can only see 256. So this is a machine that is able to see the depths of the image that we simply don't have the ability to. It's a bit like the telescope and the microscope. It didn't replace, the telescope didn't replace the astronomers. Why would this technology replace the radiologists? So you can tell I disagree with that statement.
well, good, and I'm pleased, because this is the nub of the debate for me, because we've got ourselves into a place where AI has become this incredible, significant thing, a pivotal moment in the evolution of our society. Apparently, it's even the fourth industrial revolution. I grew up in England and was trained in the English education system, so you'll have to help me with what industrial revolutions 2 and 3 were, but how did we get here? How did we get this thing that was asleep until, I don't know, 2005, has come out of a winter and is now going to fundamentally change? What's going on?
Well, I think a lot of the theory that were in the early days had been around for years. Some of the deep learning and back propagation and what have you dates back to the 1950s and 60s, particularly in the Soviet Union, where the mathematicians were doing, were coming up with the formulas. We just didn't have the technology to run them. So what's happened really is now we have lots of data, and we've got organizations like Microsoft and Google and so on, and Amazon, that can throw entire data centers at this problem. But in a sense, we haven't really scratched what AI was intended to be, which is to help humans understand the sort of the heart of the subject, which is how do we think as human beings? I mean, that was the driving force. Yes, we've got fantastic pattern recognition.
Yeah.
But that's not how humans function. I mean, whatever it is, the wetware.
So that's quite interesting. So is your proposition then that the purpose of AI is to reach what people would call general AI, so a machine that thinks like a human? Is that what we're doing?
Well, I think it's more restricted than that. Even the general AI, if you have a look at the research that was being done, primarily it started off with mathematicians wondering, what is this thing called a number, and how do humans? Where did that come from? Yeah. How does it get represented? And I'm thinking, we're talking about counting numbers. We're not talking sophisticated stuff. Given a brain, how does it represent a number? And so the entire process started in trying to understand, if we were to build a machine and we wanted it, basically to do arithmetic or something like this, how would we go about it? Because obviously now we have the ability to define what does thinking mean for a machine. And I think that's where we've got a little bit confused, is we're trying to sort of build machines that look like human beings and are going to replace human beings. That wasn't the initial goal. The initial goal was, we have the freedom to define what thinking means. Can we actually build a machine that thinks for itself, that reasons for itself, and try and understand concepts like perception and abstraction and things like this?
Right, which is, a world apart of today's narrow AI, where we're saying, given a set of parameters and a big pool of data, go tell us where the connections are. We're in a world of correlation more than anything else.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and for me, there has to be an element of causality. Every single intelligent entity that you see causally interacts with its environment. And we can see this in children or toddlers that are 2 years old. They spent their entire time saying why. And so they're trying to learn the sort of the causal words and explanations of what is going on in their environment. So I think causality is a big topic.
And that's quite interesting, though, because in today's world of AI, causality is almost irrelevant. We don't need to know why something happens, as long as the algorithm tells us that it's statistically significant. Look at those medical examples. Nobody's thinking about causality there. They're just looking at correlation, right?
Well, the medical community, the two communities that are very interested in causality are the legal and the medical world, obviously, because they want to understand we've produced some kind of antibiotic. What are going to be the implications of deploying this to a large number of people? Alternatively, they have people who are getting sick and they'd like to know what caused it. So just because taking an aspirin, takes away your headache, you haven't actually figured out what's going on. And the same is true with the legal. the organizations that appear to be interested in kind of work that I've been doing are the robotics organizations. Because if you have autonomous machines out there, roaming around amongst human beings, it would be nice for the machine to be able to figure out for itself that I need to slow down because there are humans crossing the road, and to be able to reason through its own actions. And one of the things that we haven't done is really think through that. We just have correlations.
That's really interesting, actually, on a number of levels. So there's the whole thing about autonomous cars, and one of the fears, I think, of autonomous cars is that humans will attempt to bully them, knowing that they're governed by a strict set of rules, and so they can cut them up with no fear of having an accident because they're designed to avoid them. The other thing that makes me think of is a UK example. Which is there are at this very moment autonomous robots driving around on the pavements of Milton Keynes delivering products to people, which I found really brilliant, right? Because this was a world, and this is a little bit of a hobby horse of mine. This is a world where we ban personal light electric vehicles like electric scooters and skateboards, right? Because they're dangerous, but it's perfectly feasible for an autonomous delivery bot to be roaming the streets. What kind of madness is this, right?
Well, I think part of it is, go ahead.
Well, to me, this whole sort of sense of building out this causality framework or empowering the robots to be able to do this, we're so far from making that happen. But yet there are, great examples. I think autonomous vehicles is going to be the thing that will help us drive some of those examples through. No one yet has explained to me how we solve the trolley car problem, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the ethical problem faced by an autonomous or mechanized vehicle that goes back to the turn of the 20th century, I believe, and it was sort of American trolley cars. And the dilemma is, if a trolley car's, you've got a runaway trolley car, and you have to decide which line it goes down. Both lines are blocked by civilians. One is an elderly couple, one is a couple of kids. Which line do you send the trolley car down? Who makes that decision? Very similar to the kind of ethical decision that our autonomous vehicles will be needing to make. And so then you level up into a conversation about ethics, which is a topic I know we wanted to get to today, about, well, whose ethics do we use? Is it Elon Musk's ethics that if I'm driving a Tesla versus BMW's ethics? How does that work? And where is this sort of sense of ethics in driving this conversation forward, Felix? Who's doing that? Where does it exist?
Well, I think part of the thought process here is it needs to go back to the original intent of AI, because we are building a machine. So essentially, we're playing at being creators, and it's a machine at the end of the day. So when people sort of say, well, we need to put ethic, it needs to have ethics. Whose ethics? Who decides what goes in there? Because if you have a look at and ethics are based on value systems. So, if you look at value systems throughout the world, each culture has its own different set. And I think that's going to creep up when we try and decide on how to do this. Esther Dyson, by the way, had a lovely dialogue with Charlie Muirhead in CogX 2018. And Charlie asked Esther and said, have you thought about AI ethics? And she said, quite a lot. And my favorite phrase from her was, it doesn't have any, in terms of the AI. And I think so there are elements of the AI that I think are based on philosophy and some of the other softer sciences that we really need to start thinking about, rather than just sort of thinking in terms of the dry, algorithmic, mathematical approaches, which are fragile. And I think that's the real problem.
Yeah.
The US DARPA, for example, has shown that some of these systems are actually quite fragile.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on that. I mean, the ethics one is quite interesting. We had a conversation last week along a similar vein, and it's never a great analogy when it involves a gun, but it was, if you're building something that could be used as a gun, somebody could pick it up and use it to do damage. And this is the point
Right.
about whose ethics. And we see this a lot in the tech industry. A lot of products, I will maintain, through naivety, if nothing else, are developed with the best interests in mind. Typically, you've got some wide-eyed engineer wondering how they could make the world a little bit better by doing some interesting things with algorithms that along the line could get misused, perverted by malicious actors. And should we not develop the technology as a result of that? Do we create a governance for it? How does that stuff all come together? But that's part of the narrative. I'm also deeply pleased that you bring philosophy into this, which is something that I think is lacking. When we're building a future generation, not just of software engineers, but of entrepreneurs, of people who are going to exist in the world to do business, to make the world better, and all that sort of thing. We need to do more, I think, to give them the sense of, how do we build ethics into every product we make, every organization we make, every development we make, so that we make sure that we're having the right kinds of thinking. And I'm slowly seeing, I don't know, you may have a better insight than me on this, Felix, but there are a few universities who are starting to blend computer science with philosophy. I know I was looking at one in Canada just the other day. The University of Waterloo has a dual degree where you do sort of business management and computer science, but one of the common elements is sort of the philosophy and ethics of business and computer science. Have you seen more on that?
Well, there are a number of people who are very good at this throughout the AI community, and I'm very pleased that they're doing the kind of work they are. Philosophy, for me, I think, needs to be brought back into our curriculum. I also believe that one of the ways that around this is to become professionals. One of the things we are missing in sort of the technology level is the professionalism that people like doctors and lawyers and engineers and so on are required to sort of uphold. And if you don't have that level of professionality, then society stops you from practicing. So if you look at research and biological research, there are all kinds of very unpleasant pathogens and things that could do serious damage. But there is a kind of a standard that is applied to the people in those professions that I think is missing. We've got to a point where anyone that can take a 6-week course can now start to write programs, and we don't really think about it. Well, for me, the A-level results, as sad as they may be, is a dire reminder that there are consequences, that these sort of data plus algorithms are not benign, and that's not the only case. And so I think that the philosophy helps us to understand what if this thing went wrong.
No, I love that. And I hope this isn't too controversial, but if you go to the conversations we've been having about the use of AI in law enforcement as an example, and I know there's some recent press about that and the inaccuracy of it, where are the people inside those organizations that are asking those ethical questions? And, to a certain level, I think that's obvious when you're doing these things at a societal level, and we can all have a conversation about what's going on in other national states about the use of facial recognition and all that sort of stuff. But if we were to bring this back to some of our core audience who are, people who are just in normal business, right? Normal world of work. They're trying to rebuild everything after what they've just been through. Every product that they're pitched with, or every technology company they engage with, is telling them how AI is the savior of that. What should those organizations be doing from the perspective of building out sort of a moral and an ethical framework that will help guide them use those tools to do amazing things and minimize the risk of doing the damage? Are there things that they could be doing today to do that?
I think asking the sort of the common sense questions is definitely where I would guide them. And some people are beginning to do that. So if somebody presents, that AI is going to increase their profitability and so on, just sort of question them. How is this going to happen? What are the what is the long-term impact of making those types of decisions, which I don't think we've really been taking, to be honest. I think that it's very much a short-term goal that we're trying to achieve. So it's the, let's try and do the best we can in our quarterly reporting.
Yeah, no, it's
And
interesting.
I
It
think,
leads me to another example from a guest who's yet to appear but is in the schedule for the show, who is David D'Souza from CIPD, who talks about the sort of the Jurassic Park principle, which is that moment in the first Jurassic Park movie where Jeff Goldblum basically points out, look, just because you can do a thing doesn't necessarily mean that you should do a thing.
exactly.
And I think it's those questions, and what I think about is a world where, traditional organizations who are not tech companies are slowly more and more empowered by AI. And I worry, and the language is a bit emotional, but I worry that they get overly seduced by the potential of what AI can do for them based on the data they have access to, that they might start to do things that maybe they shouldn't do, or maybe certainly that they would need to ask permission from, the people whose data it is, typically their customers, before they go do it. And I think it's back to that, general grounding in philosophy and thinking about the implications of things that I think becomes a core human skill in our growing relationship with the machines.
And I think for me, it's a little bit more than that. One of the reasons we as Homo sapiens have been so successful is because we have societies. We relate to one another, we collaborate with one another. That's our greatest strength. And right now, we are tearing that apart. And so there are consequences to that as well. If you look at, termites and bees and so on, individual ones are not very effective. Yet when you have, 20 million, if you have 20 million locusts as the swarms in Africa that are causing humanity grief, they will strip the land and they will starve people to death. And yet individually, they're no match for us. But I honestly believe that we need to start, and that's why the causality is so important. We need to start asking what if questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've noticed we just had a comment come in about talking about autonomous vehicles, actually. Yeah, and there's another sort of question. It goes back to sort of moral and ethics, and I do love this one. Is I was talking about is it Elon's ethics, is it BMW's ethics, and if there is a problem caused by the reaction of the autonomous vehicle, who do we sue? Do we sue the owner
Right.
of the vehicle? Do we sue the guy who wrote the software? How does that all work?
Well, I think, again, part of it is that we're not looking at the self-driving Tesla as a self-driving machine. We are trying to give it attributes of a human being. Well, when it has an accident, does it feel pain? Does it, and therefore, this thing of if it collides with a human being, who's responsible? Um, and there was an argument earlier this year where they said, well, the AI has created, this design, so it should get the patent. I think we're going overboard.
Yeah, yeah,
And my fear of this sort of promises that the technology cannot deliver, and including, Professor Bengio talked about translation systems, and this is in 2019. Where he said he was told that it is superior to human beings, and no, it's not.
yeah,
And he took a very simple sentence and translated it into French, and French being his primary language, and he says it's completely wrong.
yeah.
So I've gone off the track a little bit, but I don't believe that we're going to get to that singularity point for a very long time, and we really shouldn't be thinking of these machines as living things responsible for their actions.
No, exactly.
That's
So look, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to ask you a really big question, but I'm looking
okay.
for a shortish answer. Does AI deserve the level of hype that's been thrown at it?
No.
Fantastic. You heard it here first. Next week on the world's biggest questions.
That's right. It's come a very long way. And there are 4 pillars of AI, essentially, which is, learning, reasoning, perception, and communication. Now, a lot of people are looking at this as natural language processing. But in reality, nobody talked about it having to be natural language. I mean, we talk to our machines right now. We use, Pascal and Python and other languages to talk to the machine. So being able to communicate with the machine, it's far easier if we think about it and design a language that is suitable for both, rather than trying to sort of modify a 1,000-year-old language, which is vague and imprecise and doesn't really work for human beings, and force AI to do that. But there's so much that these technologies are not capable of. And in particular, my favorite one is Stuart Russell gave a Turing lecture earlier this year, just a few months ago, in which he shows the 2 avatars playing football, and in the morning they didn't know how to do it. By the afternoon, they're playing football. Well, it turns out that if you change the program for one of them, it has a negative effect for the program for the other one. So neither of them can play football by a small change. So the hype is just out of control. And what worries me is I've seen this before with the last AI winter. And once people realize that they're not getting anything like what they were promised, then the money dries up, and it just goes into hiding for another couple of decades. And that worries me, because we need to sort of carry on working at this. We're nowhere near being able to deliver something that looks like the Terminator, which is what people believe is imminent.
Yeah.
In a few hundred years, maybe.
No, exactly. Well, look, that's a really thoughtful place for us to leave it, Felix, because I think that puts it exactly where it needs to be, where it's kind of all to play for, right? We've got to decide what we want to do going forward. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for giving me a Wednesday evening. It's been brilliant to catch up with you, as always. And we'll continue the conversation. So thanks for joining us, Felix.
Thank you so much, Dave. I really enjoyed it.
That's great. So all that's left for me to do is just a final couple of bits of housekeeping. We have to thank our sponsors. Again, we don't have to. I say that every week. I get it wrong. We don't have to do it. They pay us to do it. It's wonderful to do it. They're lovely guys. They do amazing things with digital. They'll do your website. They'll do your print. They'll do your, I can't even think of the word. They'll do your coasters. I've shown you this before. It's a highlight of my day. All of these things the fantastic guys at Treble 3 will do for you. They're amazing guys. Love to work with you. And then finally, if you're doing nothing on September 2nd, I've got a nice little event for you. We're going to be building your future in a channel which is not as dull as it sounds, is actually about the potential that we now have in a world of innovation, where people like you and your customers and consumers are inspired by technology because it's changed their opportunity of how they lived through lockdown and the pandemic. Ingram Micro Cloud, got to say big thanks to them, because they're really leaning into this. They're trying to help people create better solutions, more innovation with AI for their customers. That's on September 2nd. It'd be great if you could join us. That's it from me this week. We've got another great conversation coming up with you next week. It'd be great if you could join us. Thanks again for giving us some time. And you know the drill. I've got to press the button. So we'd love to get your subscription. We'd love you if you've enjoyed the video, if you've found it helpful, give us a like. If you've not found it helpful, give us some feedback. Help us grow this, help us do more, and we can do something that gives you more value as we go through. Thanks again for joining, and we will see you again soon.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them.